Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to the St. Helena Planning Commission meeting for June 7th, 2016, and I would like to lead you in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Koberstein,
Present.
Commissioner Monette,
Here.
Commissioner Sweeney,
Commissioner Sweeney is absent this evening.
Vice Chair Kistner,
Here.
Chairperson Parker.
Present. Moving on to our public forum, this is an opportunity for the public to address the Commission on items of interest to the public that are not listed on tonight's agenda. Because of restrictions imposed by the Brown Act, the Commission may not engage in discussion nor take actions on matters not described on the agenda. Would anyone like to speak at public forum? Seeing none, I'm going to move on to our consent items. We have one of the approval of the minutes. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes from our May 17th?
I had something to say about that. So I'm trying to find them now. Agenda. Yeah, is that number 4? Yeah. Okay. It says the motion was moved to approve the consent calendar with the noted revision. There is no place that notes the revision, and I don't know if they're supposed to be, but it would seem appropriate. If it's not required, then I don't care, but if it would certainly make more sense if it were, unless I missed it, which is possible. And then I wondered too about this public hearing stuff, and I just didn't know how to interpret all of this. Closed public hearing.
Well, we opened and closed the public hearing because there were separate items for each.
But there's no mention of any of it.
That's because this is just like the skeleton. Our actual real minutes are our video.
Okay. Usually it says who spoke.
There was no public comment, so that's why it doesn't say who spoke.
Okay. Oh, I get. Okay.
So it does say that Jeff Ellsworth did speak on one item.
That makes sense. And okay. But the other thing, I'm not sure what you guys think. I don't know if it should be included. The referred noted revision. At least I didn't find it.
The revision was actually the names that you wanted me to correct on the minutes. That was the revision, but I can go ahead and add that on the motion.
Okay, because it might be clear someone, looking back and wanting to see what that was.
Sure,
Thank you.
I'll go ahead and add that.
That's good. So I move that we accept the minutes.
Accept the minutes with the revisions?
With the revision. With the noted revision.
Do we have a second?
Second.
So that was Commissioner Monette and Koberstein.
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Commissioner Koberstein,
Yes.
Vice Chair Kistner,
Abstain, I wasn't here.
Chairperson Parker.
Yes. All right, moving on to our Planning Commission study session discussion. I believe that Mr. Hausch is going to tee off this for us. Thank you. If we could have a...
Thank you, Chair Parker. Before Mr. Carniglia gets into his presentation, I just want to identify that this item is a discussion of proposed and requested general plan language modifications submitted by Citizens Voice and supported by some petitions regarding tourism and winery land uses here in St. Helena. There was some confusion on staff's part regarding the timing of this review and discussion. Staff originally intended to bring the item before the Planning Commission on June 21st, along with all the other items or comments received on the general plan update to date. However, the direction and understanding of some of the citizens, some of the commissioners, and Citizens Voice understood that the review would be at the next meeting, not at the next meeting scheduled to discuss the general plan. So there was some confusion, and I just want to identify and acknowledge that, accept full responsibility for it, and apologize for some of the late information that came with regards to the information posted. So just wanted to let that be known and apologize to anyone who was inconvenienced by that prior to consultant Mr. Carniglia presenting his presentation.
Thank you.
Yes, what I'd like to do is actually have a fairly short presentation. As Noah indicated, there were 2 petitions that were submitted, and so what we did from a staff standpoint was we, in the staff report that came out somewhat late, came out today, we attempted to address both petitions and provided some notes and kind of comments on each of those. In terms of the petition dealing with tourism and local serving businesses, the staff report notes a number of, I guess you call staff opinions or comments based on the various wording changes that are proposed in the petition. As Noah indicates, it was really our intent to get into those more at the meeting on the 21st. When this issue came up, I spoke to Doug Barr, who had submitted the petition back in April, and indicated to him that just given the fact that both petitions were submitted and there was a little bit of confusion, that there may be discussion of this issue of local serving and tourism tonight. So it's really up to the commission in terms of how much detail you want to get into. What I tried to do was simply indicate kind of staff's opinion or thoughts on each one of the wording changes, and I won't get into any detail on that right now. If the commission wants to get into the wording tonight, then I can get into that in a bit more detail, although the staff responses in the report are more in kind of a outline response format. The other petition deals with the issue of wineries, and submitted by, both petitions were submitted by Susan Kenward. And in the petition, there's some wording proposed, the gist of which essentially would to limit wineries to 20-acre or more parcels. I think, and Susan can speak to this better than I, but I think the concern was that it was felt that wineries were more appropriate on larger acreage properties in the city. So as the language is proposed, essentially what it would do is that if you wanted to put a winery in town, you'd have to have a 20-acre minimum parcel. The wording is proposed does not differentiate between land use designations. So arguably, if it was an ag zone or even an industrial zone, as long as the parcel was 20 acres, you could apply for a winery. And essentially the language as it relates to small wineries leaves things, from what I could tell, as they stand currently in terms of requirements. And let me just kind of touch on quickly how wineries are currently regulated, and then kind of, but before doing that, kind of make the note that this whole question of getting into the details of land use and exactly which zone wineries should go into is really more of a zoning level action. I think it's appropriate, though, for the general plan to have some policy direction that kind of frames what that should look like, but not necessarily work out all the details. So with that kind of as an overview, right now in the zoning, wineries are allowed in a number of designations. With the proposed wording, wineries could only go in essentially 20-acre or more parcels. One is in the winery zone, and this is similar to what the proposed wording is aiming at, and is reflective essentially of it, because this is indeed a 20-acre minimum lot size. It's set up kind of in an unusual fashion that the way the code is set up, that if you have a ag land use and you put a winery use on it, then the winery zone automatically takes hold. But that, I think that's something that's going to need to be clarified in the zoning ordinance update. But at any rate, the language as proposed really wouldn't change how the winery zone currently treats wineries. Where it would have an effect is primarily in the service commercial and in the industrial. In the service commercial zone, you can have a winery with a use permit. There are a number of restrictions and requirements, but one of the biggest differences is that the lot size can be as little as 10,000 square feet, or a quarter of an acre, which is obviously a lot less than a 20-acre minimum. And the other is in the industrial zone. Right now, you can have a winery in the industrial zone also with a use permit. There is language in the zoning ordinance that prohibits retail sales or tasting in the industrial zone, and the minimum lot size there is 20,000 square feet, so essentially half an acre. And wineries are also allowed with a use permit in the Woodland and Watershed District, but that has a 40-acre minimum, so the proposed wording change really wouldn't affect that. The changes proposed would definitely have an effect. So if the commission and ultimately council are looking at some policy language similar to what is proposed, it would affect the way things are currently regulated. I think it's worth noting a couple of things. One is before the commission really goes ahead with definitive language, staff would need to look at the existing wineries and just see how they're affected or not affected by the change. The other is to point out that currently in all of the districts I mentioned, a winery needs a use permit. It's not a permitted use. So the city has the authority to go case by case and decide whether on a given property, whether it be service, commercial, or industrial, whether a winery does or doesn't make sense. And also by picking out wineries as, for instance, not to be allowed, let's say, in the industrial zone, I believe with the use permit you could have a tannery or a similar kind of use, but you would be saying no wineries in industrial, but a tannery or other uses that folks might consider or likely consider to be objectionable could be considered with a use permit. And the last point is that there isn't that much land in the city that's designated service, commercial, and industrial. Roughly around 90 to 100 acres total, about 3 to 4% of the land. So there's not a lot of acreage involved, but most of that acreage is in the center of town on Highway 29. So at any rate, that's a little bit of background on the issue, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Victor right now? Does anyone have a comment?
Could we start by determining what we're going to discuss this evening?
I actually think that would be a good idea because I was under the impression that I wanted just the winery discussion to come back, not the letter on tourism, because we have discussed tourism in depth, really at our May 17th meeting, and then a little bit at the meeting previous to that. But I do see that there are people here that want to discuss it, so I am open to listening to them, but maybe holding back any comments, and if we really need to have a revision, we can bring them to the June 21st meeting. We can bring those comments. So that kind of keeps discussion not with us, but just to listen tonight.
I'm just wondering if any of the discussion that happens on either of these topics tonight will be considered public comment with respect to the 45-day comment period for the EIR and the general plan.
No, we are scheduling the 21st for the public hearing required to receive public comment on the EIR.
You mean people can't comment? I mean, this is within that period, right?
They can make comments. This is not actually a public hearing, so the CEQA requires that EIRs be published for a 45-day review and comment period, and within that time period, jurisdictions or lead agencies must hold a public hearing on that item to allow essentially voiced comments in addition to the written comments. That public hearing is scheduled for June 21st. That is not on the agenda for tonight. So, of course, this is during the 45-day public review and comment period. However, it is not the public hearing scheduled to have and to receive those comments.
And is that true also for letters that are sent in to you saying, this is the 45-day comment period? Mr. Hosch, I would like this to be part of the comments. Can people do that, or does everything have to come?
No, 100%. So just for members at home or in the audience and for the commission. So the intent of this period is to allow both written and verbal comments to be provided to the lead agency, which is the city in this instance. So please do write your letters directly to me. And then those will be included in the comments that are formally responded to at the close of the comment period, which is a 45-day period of time, in addition to whatever voiced comments we received at the public hearing intended to receive those comments.
Is a petition acceptable as written comment?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
So I guess going back to the question is, do we want to, I would like to listen, but I also think that I'm not sure that I'm going to hear a lot that I haven't already heard. Unfortunately, that's a little presumptive, but I've read both petitions. I've we kind of already went through this, not kind of, we
But
did
it's
go
on
through
the
this.
agenda, right?
Yeah.
So I think that it's on the agenda, the public.
Well, I'm not saying not to listen. I'm just saying to hold back discussion until our next meeting.
I would be willing to, I think it is not a bad idea to have discussion, since both of those, are we going to have discussion on the winery thing?
Yes, because that's what we asked.
That's
Yeah,
what
but
we
that,
asked
but
for.
I understand that, but what's on the agenda is what the public sees. They don't know about, we asked for just that, and I think we should
I
respect
disagree.
the public participation.
So the agenda
then-
doesn't specify
Oh.
which.
Then I will caveat that, say, if, Bobby, if you feel that if
I mean,
there's,
that's
or
my
anyone,
opinion.
if there's anything above and beyond what we've already recommended to staff, then yes, you can add it tonight.
Okay, so
But
there-
I don't want to have a full-on discussion over something that we've already had. But if there's something new that pops up that we feel is pertinent,
well,
yes,
I
let's
can't
say something
remember
tonight.
what old or new, but how do I? I'm just bringing that up. How do other people feel? I'm not saying we have to do it.
I personally think we've gone through it once, and I'm not sure that I want to go through it a second time. And I think one of the things that happened was that you asked that we pay attention to Ms. Kimner, and that's what the intent was for the night,
Okay,
to the winery.
right, but again,
The other stuff we've already talked about.
but we don't know what's going to come up tonight. But whatever.
And that's also to say we still have
We still have another
the public comment
meeting
hearing.
to go over that.
I understand, but
Okay.
I think it's important to respect.
Anyway, that's my feeling. I think we should discuss the winery tonight and let the other thing fall on the 21st.
What do you think?
I agree. I mean, I think it was fairly clear at our last meeting. I think you asked if we were going to discuss the winery
Correct.
issue, and I believe Sarah said she wanted to put it over to the next meeting.
Right.
So,
But the public.
I
didn't
myself
necessarily know that.
contacted the staff when the agenda came out because I expected to see discussion of the winery petition. And then, the agenda makes it look more broad than it is, but frankly, we already had two pretty thorough discussions about the tourist
And
element.
I also
Well,
called
I'm-
staff to indicate that you had asked for the winery thing because it was not in the
Yeah,
agenda.
I did too. Okay, well, I appreciate your making room, because I'm the only one who thinks this. But you're making room for any.
Oh no,
new
I would
thing.
like to listen. I would like to listen to the people who came here tonight. They took time out of their evening. I'm not going to say that they can't talk. I'm just saying that I would like to hold back our comments unless it's above and beyond what we've already discussed.
Unless it's something new.
That's correct.
Okay. That,
All right. Okay. With that, let's get going.
Wait a
and
minute, so we cannot comment on what people are commenting
no,
on?
we can if it's above and beyond. If I just don't think that we need to just keep spinning our wheels over something that we've already discussed.
Okay.
And the item was noticed broadly enough that any discussion the commission wishes to have tonight on either one of these petitions is open per the Brown Act.
Can we start with the wineries?
Yeah.
Since-
Let's start with the winery. All right. So, who would like to speak on the? I'm going to open up the public comment for the winery petition.
is there? Can we ask a question of staff before we do that? Or
Yes, I'm going to close the public
I'm
comment
sorry,
for the
I-
winery petition. Go ahead, Asaf.
I just had a question. It was my recollection that the wording that was asked to be inserted into the general plan was already wording that's already in our code. That there was nothing new introduced, and just the staff report kind of says that this wording about the 20-acre. My understanding was that am I not understanding something, or is that your understanding as well, that it was not going to be adding any new language? It was simply going to be putting language that's already in our code so that it would be clear in the general plan what the definition of winery was.
Well, yes and no. What the language does is currently there is wording in the general plan, and there's a policy. I forget the number off the top of my head. It's LU 5.6. The revised wording, the new wording, changes that policy. The new wording, a lot of it is taken from the city zoning ordinance. So in that sense, it's not new wording. But by putting this into the general plan as a new policy, it changes where wineries would or wouldn't be allowed in the city. So to the extent some of it or a lot of it is wording that's currently in the zoning ordinance or in other city documents, that's true. But by replacing LU 5.6 with this wording, based on the way I read it and just my interpretation, it would significantly change, mainly, as I mentioned in my presentation, in the service, commercial, and industrial areas where you could or couldn't have a winery. So the I guess the short answer is that it is new language from a general plan standpoint, but the wording itself, some of it is old in the sense that it's from the zoning ordinance.
So does, that inconsistency is not, you don't feel, so that inconsistency shouldn't be resolved by changing the wording in the general plan to meet the ordinance, or does that, can I infer that you're thinking of changing the ordinance afterwards to?
Well, I wouldn't call it an inconsistency. I mean, you could call it that if you'd like, but essentially what the zoning code does is it says in the ag zone, where a lot of this, or in the winery zone, these are the certain requirements that need to be met, including the 20-acre minimum. There is no definition in the zoning code of wineries. The definition mainly appears under the winery section. However, in another zoning district, in the service commercial and in the industrial district, it also allows a winery with a use permit. So I wouldn't call that inconsistencies. It's simply that the code allows wineries in a number of designations, and those designations happen to have radically different minimum lot sizes. In the case of the ag or winery zone, it's 20 acres. In the service commercial, it's 10,000 square feet, or roughly a quarter of an acre, or in the industrial zone, it's 20,000 square feet, roughly of half an acre. So I think, Ms. Kenward can speak to this, but I think she, at the last meeting, felt that was an inconsistency, perhaps, that difference in lot sizes. But from a staff standpoint, it simply provides for wineries in different zoning designations that happen to have different restrictions and limit, particularly as it relates to minimum lot size.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions, comments?
I have a question. I just don't have the history here to know, but I see this policy that we're going to discuss, and it's in the section of the plan dealing with agricultural uses, and it talks about permitting wineries, other agricultural-related industries. So to me, that sort of implies you're talking about the full-blown thing, as though you're taking a winery, or you're maybe establishing a new winery that is industrial. And I'm just wondering, was that the intent, or does anybody know how this language came about?
Yeah, I don't myself really have enough background or history to say. I think essentially the idea, the zoning ordinance and land use requirements are very broad in terms of allowing ag in most zones. So to some extent, maybe it's an offshoot of that. But I agree with you. It's very broad and doesn't give, I guess you'd consider much direction or guidance in terms of the type of zoning district it should go or not go into. But it does use the term industry. So that's a long way of saying I really don't know.
Yeah, it seems a little open to interpretation. I mean, if you're talking about agriculture, I think you're thinking there are vines there. That's what we're talking about, maybe. The word industry seems to, I guess what I'm getting at is, to me, this policy seems to go more towards preserving some agricultural use by allowing it to happen somewhere within the city, and then it maybe doesn't go directly to these little use permits that might be issued in the service commercial. That maybe that was not the intention of this.
I completely agree with that. I think the intent is that's an ag-related policy, and it doesn't get to the question of should there be wineries on industrially designated parcels of less than 20 acres or not, basis in response to the comment we received from Citizens Voice.
Okay, with that, I'm going to open up the public comment.
Susan Kenwood would be me. And thank you all for your time again. Here we go again. I was going to start with the language, but I'm going to backtrack to general plan and general. in the staff report, it says that the proposed language that we're proposing is atypical of a general plan land use policy, given the explicit nature of the wording as compared to the general nature of most general plan policies. Well, have gone on the internet several times, and in 2016, the state of California put out a whole new regulation on how to write a general plan. And they said, and I quote, "The general plan is more than the legal underpinning for land use decisions. It is a vision. It is a blueprint for development." It goes on to say, California state law requires each city and county to adopt a general plan for the physical development of the county and the city and any land outside its boundaries which bears a relation to its planning. The general plan expresses the community's development goals and embodies public policy relative to the distribution of future land uses, both public and private. The California Supreme Court has called the general plan the Constitution for future development. It is not general language. It is the blueprint so that people that come to this community know what to expect, know what to come to you and ask for. And if you make it so general, then anybody that's in office can interpret it any way they want. And I don't think that that's what this is saying. I think that it should be explanatory enough so that anybody that looks at it will understand where to go. Okay, so then the next one is so the proposed wording that Victor talked about, and he's right, and he's right, and I'm wrong, and he's wrong. We're both saying that. We're all saying that. It's that the wording is too ambiguous because it says that the language is 20 acres or 5 acres, depending on whether it's an ag or W or agriculture, and 5 acres if it has accessory residential use. This would be a significant change from current requirements. It would not. This is the only two definitions that are in the general plan. It does say that you could have a use in industrial, or you can have a use in service commercial. You could have wineries a use, but it does not go into this deep definition of what a winery is. It just says it's a use, and then you have the lot sizes and the whatever, but it doesn't say exactly what a winery is. So that's where I'm going with this. There are only two definitions, and this total lack of specific language in service commercial and industrial creates the ambiguity, which allows and leads to inconsistent treatment of wineries. And then the winery should have a clear meaning, and then the meaning, moreover, should regulate and be consistent, especially concerning accessory uses such as picnic facilities, kitchens, and event centers. That's where we're going with this, and that's why we took the language from the general plan. It is pretty much verbatim, except for the accessory uses, which we took from the winery definition from the county. That's where that language came from. So we're all right. We need to define it more because it's not defined, and if you're doing it in the zoning, I don't know. I think it should be in the general plan because I think it needs to be more specific. The staff needs to conduct additional analysis to determine what impacts the proposed language would have on the review and approve process for wineries within the community, including the potential for unintended consequences. I put this language to the city council. Can I keep going? Last September 15th. So when are you going to review it? I mean, you've had it since last September. It keeps getting kicked down the road. I really feel that we've got to take a stand here, and we've really got to address it. And then the final one, it says a point worth emphasizing is the commission says that the general plan, this draft, we've been going for 10 years. Well, the St. Helena Star, in an editorial on our group, The Citizens' Voice, specific proposals said, and I quote, "Specific proposals, a lot of them are reasonable, and we hope the Planning Commission and the City Council gives them some serious thought. Ordinarily, we would be not be in favor of tinkering with the general plan at such a late stage. We've been advocating its adoption since 2010. However, since the city is already proposing a new zoning designation that would affect more than half the city's residential areas, we feel the rest of the plan is fair game." And so do we. And that's That's where we're coming from, and I hope you'll listen to what we're dealing with. Thank you.
Thank
Do
you.
you want to? Should I stay up for questions or?
Yeah, I think that would be appropriate.
You know, it would help me if we could sort of get to the essence of your concern, whether it's the event quality of a winery in the city or what it is.
Right.
Just recognizing that once we pass this,
What are you going to have?
who knows what's going to happen to the zoning ordinance. And so with the idea of trying to keep the plan general and a guiding document, could you articulate?
Yes, I'd be happy to. And the one other thing I wanted to say is that the Vintners Association, the community committee, has asked me to talk to all of the vintners about the impact of this and what we're also meaning by this on Thursday. And I believe Noah and Sarah have also been invited to that meeting. So this will be a good idea to explain it to you so I can explain it to them. Our concerns are that that it's very regulated in the city. It's very regulated. The language is very regulated in the zoning, and I don't have any fight with that. I think that they did a very good job in 1993. I think that there was a misunderstanding when they wrote, and this is my interpretation, but I think that if you look since 1993 until 2 years ago, everybody interpreted it this way as well. As that if you went to service commercial or you went to industrial and you wanted to have a winery, then you went to the winery section and read about what a winery was. Because there was no definition. So you would go to the other section in the municipal code and look up wineries, and there are only two kinds of wineries listed. So in one sense, I'm sort of closing that loophole. There is not a lot of land left in service commercial. However, what is on service commercial can change. I believe it's service commercial that's across from the elementary school where all the dentist office and all the offices and stuff are. I mean, means that, as he said, you could put a winery on a half an acre. So do we want the city lined with wineries as you enter the town? I mean, you've got to look at the long picture and say, oh, well, we won't vote for that. Well, if you've given it to one and you set that precedent, any lawyer that I know is going to fight you that you're going to have to explain why not. And the same with commercial, is that I'm not saying that it couldn't be a production facility. I mean, I think this is a big issue and there's a lot of room for discussion on what this should be. So can you have production facilities in service commercial and production facilities in industrial, and they have different regulations at a winery? I mean, does a winery have vines? Or is a winery just a place where you make wine? And do wineries in every section get to have the same rules? We've not had to define that before. It's been something that we haven't had to look at. But now it's come up that we need to look at it. And now it's a good opportunity because the general plan is not quite finished and there are lots of issues. And I think it would be a real opportunity, and since the rest of the community through the Vintners Association is interested in I think it would be great to get some feedback from them because it's not me, it's what the community wants to do, and so there's a lot of people that are pushing me to talk. So I think that it would be nice to visit all of it, to look at everything. Does that help? Is that more specific?
Yeah, I'd like to find a way to sort of address the concern or deal with this policy that doesn't focus us on the service commercial or how it's currently mapped, because that could change.
Right, it could change.
And so I'm looking for some more guiding principle. To me, this is kind of agricultural focused given where it is, but maybe your concern would be addressed if it was more agricultural focused as it is written.
I believe that it always was agriculturally based. I think that's what makes St. Helena so unusual compared to our towns and sphere of influence, is that we do have these small wineries on these 5 acres, and that we do have some really world-class wineries, but they're on these big acres, and they protect the community from the trucks and he said a tannery, yes, but the whole thing was you want to protect the community around it for everything that goes in and out of a large winery. And we don't even have a definition of what a large winery is. Is it 30,000? Is it 75,000? Is it 100,000? I mean, all of these questions have not been addressed. And to me, agriculture is the key component, is that a winery has vineyard. A production facility does not. And that would be my definition of it. It would be the difference. And to protect the town agriculturally, our agricultural base, it would be great to have a definition of a winery that is consistent through all zones. And so I think that's where we're trying to go with this. It's a big issue. It's not a little issue. It's a big issue. And I think it would be great if we could look at it.
Well, would it get partway there if this language said, if we're talking about zones that are designated for agriculture or industry?
Well, so that they would have to be in an agricultural zone or, I'm sorry, I'm losing this thing.
Well, and I take it you transport, your winery goes there and then it becomes winery district, if I understand correctly.
Well, I don't know.
Under the current regulations.
Yeah, I don't.
For agriculturally designated parcels.
Because it's sort of self-limiting now because of W and ag and 20-acre ag and housing. It's very self-limiting. So now we're looking at putting wineries, or are we putting agricultural wineries, or are we putting production facilities? What are we putting in service commercial and commercial?
I'm wondering what is the difference for you between a production, a winery and a production
Well, she just said that a winery has vineyard and a production facility.
that's...
The production facility in our sphere of influence, I actually took the time to annoy every person on a planning commission in our sphere of influence. I talked to Healdsburg and Calistoga and Sonoma and Yountville and even Napa, even though they're totally 3 times bigger than we are, to see how they handled all this. And there is a difference between a production facility and a winery. Mm-hmm. And a production facility is not allowed to have visitors, and they're not allowed to have events. They are allowed to make wine.
And wineries are allowed those.
And
those
wineries are allowed to do those.
Okay, that's what I was thinking of.
All right.
So that's a difference.
If we have a small winery, I guess this is for the staff, what is the underlying zoning? If someone establishes a small, within the 5-acre, with the house on the property, how does that get zoned? The underlying residential zone or ag zone?
So you're saying if it's someone's approved for a family winery, small family winery, is that
under the small winery ordinance? What is the underlying zoning once you establish one of those?
It has to be ag in order to get that approval. I don't know that if it's the small family winery, if it triggers the zoning designation to go to winery, like it does on the larger. And I don't know, Victor, if you were able to. We don't believe it does. We didn't answer that question specifically. Getting to one of the issues, Ms. Kenward, wineries in industrial areas or zones currently are not allowed to have events. It's specifically prohibited in the zoning code.
All right. Any other questions for Ms. Kenward?
Not in the service commercial.
Not in service commercial.
So that's exactly right. Service commercial, your winery does not have that limitation. The limitations are placed on the individual uses on a case-by-case basis with the use permit review. So they could be limited. So if someone filed a use permit in service commercial, they could be limited to no events, no guests. Or they could be, that's a part of the use permit, or they could be approved to have events and guests based on the individual case-by-case analysis of the planning commission and the individual elements of that application.
But until we just did the project across the street, I think it was over 100 years since a winery was allowed in service commercial that had all this, which was first called Sunnyvale and now was Sunnyside, and now it's Maryvale. There were no other wine. No one did it. We let them have tasting rooms, And then there were some production facilities and industrial, but this is a whole new thing here we're going to.
I mean,
Or
the crux of the issue, as I'm hearing it, is should a winery with events and guests be allowed in the service commercial zoning district or other zoning districts?
Or in how many acres, or what do they need?
Or should they be located, or larger size parcels, or only in agricultural areas with grapevines? I mean, that's kind of the gist of all the questions.
All right, perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Oh,
Jeff Ellsworth, Sylvaner. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of echo that a little bit. It's about, I believe, being specific because of impacts. So if we're not specific and we just leave the general plan to say a winery is a use here, then it leaves it up to the developer to decide what a winery is. Now, could a winery have a roller coaster? Could a winery have a swimming pool? This is one of the, discussions that's happening when we're on the county level talking about what is a winery, what is agriculture. We saw in the county in 2008 that the definition of agriculture changed to elevate the word marketing to be equal to farming. So somebody could argue that, well, we took out these vines on the ag parcel and we put in a roller coaster because it's wine marketing. So specifics keep us from going off on tangents like that, so we can protect both the integrity of the true agricultural product that we're selling here, and also that we protect our residents who vote for the ag preserve. We protect our residents so they don't move away because the impacts from traffic, water use, and what can also be called binge tourism, which we're seeing, where last year I counted 8 to 10 people dying in the county from accidents related to basically adult spring break behavior, drinking too much and meeting their misfortune. So the idea is that if we specify what a winery is and keep it in control, then we as the city keep the control rather than leaving it up to the developer or whoever to decide what a winery is and redefine it. So by connecting the general plan to the zoning, we say, yes, you can have a winery, but this is how it's defined. And within that definition, we're pleased to have you have a winery. That's the business that my family was in here and that we built this place on. But if we lose the definitions, we lose the integrity of what we're doing here, and we also compromise the health, welfare, and safety of our citizens who stay here and vote to keep this place protected. So making it specific and connected, I believe, is very important. Thank you.
thank you. Would anyone else like to speak on the winery petition this evening? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public comment and invite commission discussion. I know that I will start off, actually would like to think about this and refrain from commenting. I just need to kind of absorb. That was a lot of information just now. And I don't feel prepared to give a comment.
Does any,
But if anyone else wants to go.
no, go.
Commissioner Kistner.
I guess I'd like to ask them if what they're really asking for is a definition of a winery in each zoning district.
It does seem like it wants to be separated out.
That's what it appears to me. I mean, I think that's the only way we sign it. And I don't know it has to be a winery or it has to be a production facility. I understand the difference between the two. Yeah, and I don't know how we get there other than that, so I need some help, is what I'm asking
No,
for.
I hear you. It's a big idea. You could have a basic definition of a winery in the general plan, and then the zoning could be more specific. But we've got to put it. That's what I would like to see. The basic definition of a winery and whether it includes agriculture in the general plan, and then each zoning area would be more specific, because that's what's happening now. I mean, if you go to wineries, you go to the winery section, there's, I think there's four or five different types of, well, 5 acres, W, 20 acres, and ag.
think
Four.
it's 5.
Right.
4?
4. And some things are grandfathered in. I mean, so, you know, there's going to be a little wiggle room. There are definitely some people that have different acreage that is grandfathered in. But I think going forward, to protect the town, I mean, it would really help to have a definition for each area that you're permitting one. Because I think that nobody translated it like that before. It just...
Well, that's what struck me listening to you
Yeah.
and Mr. Ellsworth speaking.
Yeah, that it was just said winery, and so you went and looked at winery under zoning. So it was like this little, rather large loophole.
So what if the same restrictions were there for commercial, service commercial as for industrial? Would that help?
I mean, I think it depends on what everyone wants to define a winery as. Are you going to say that it needs vines? Because if you're in service commercial, you don't have any vines, so
Right, but in the
industrial you don't have vines either. So
But if you
are you
could
going to
have,
call it a winery? That's the question. Are you going to call it a winery, or are you going to call it a production facility?
well, that's what I'm suggesting, that if you called it a production facility in both industrial and service commercial.
Well, that's what I think should. I
Would-
mean, that's if
okay.
you want my opinion. And the other thing is that, you know, wineries. One of the reasons they had the 20-acre minimum around them is because most of them are pretty big, and there's lots of grapes coming in, and there's a lot of minutia that goes on traffic-wise that should be considered if a winery is going to be making wine in any of these areas. I mean, maybe not any more than Central Valley or whatever, but you've got to take into account the traffic that is associated.
There is a very large difference of traffic between a winery production building and a winery.
Yeah.
And I think
noise.
that maybe there needs to be a split of those two, a definition, because there isn't one. So
And
that might be the first step to.
I recall it when I remember one of the city council members said that one of the loudest things about a winery production facility or a winery are the forklifts. And the forklifts, you know, it doesn't even have to be the trucks in terms of noise. So there's traffic and the noise of that, but there's also noise that's generated by the work that's being done at the winery. That's, you know, sometimes 24/7 during certain seasons and so forth.
And then the next thing would be, if it's a production facility, is it 85% Napa grapes? That's what it is, in the city, right? For everything, 75? 75.
So those are impacts.
Yeah, they're impact. There's lots of impact. There's lots of impacts. Water, I mean, we don't even need to go down that road.
Yeah, it still have to be part of the conversation.
You know,
Go ahead.
I mean, it seems to me that where we're going is that there maybe should be something in the plan that a goal or a policy to define the winery business, segment it, and come up with uses that are appropriate for the districts that
wineries used to be
they're
able
going to
to be
be
in, yeah.
located in. And maybe also something in the commercial chapter, just dealing with evaluation of event centers in terms of traffic and, you know, impact.
And I think the input that we get from the local vintners will be very valuable Thursday. I mean, so that should flow through this too, so that we have both the citizens and vintners both keying in on this, what's important to both, and how, because they're both parts of the community. A lot of times the big production facilities, the people don't live here, or the smaller ones, people do live here, and so, you know, we've also got to look at the impact on the citizens on the really big ones.
Yeah, I really agree with what Ms. Coberstein said, and in terms of that kind of language being put in, that would be the kind of language that could be put in, and that's.
All right.
I really like that idea.
Thank you
Okay.
again.
Thank you. Okay.
Any other discussion?
I guess you wanted to think on this more. What does that mean?
I
in
do,
terms-
but if you
bring
want
it
to give
back?
any kind of comments,
No, give it maybe in terms of what Mary just said, you take some time to work on what that language might be.
Kind of need to just like marinate on the idea of like, what exactly.
Or talk about it
what-
more. Or
I'd like to discuss it more, I think, at the next meeting.
okay, so
on the 21st.
Okay, that's okay with me. But yeah, as long as that's specifically mentioned, yeah.
All right, perfect. Well, with that, let's.
Well, I don't know.
Grace?
Noah, can you guys come back with some of that stuff for the next meeting?
Yeah, so how I'm imagining the next meeting, the presentation to go, although I won't be there and Victor will be preparing the staff report, is that we're going to provide a summary of the direction we've received so far from the Planning Commission. We're going to identify and summarize the comments received from the public and a couple letters from attorneys' offices on the general plan to date. We'll provide responses to those letters, and then as I'm thinking about this, we'll probably identify outstanding issues or questions that we have to get clarity on from the Planning Commission. And all of that will go into formalizing the recommendation from the Commission onto the City Council regarding the general plan.
Is it inappropriate to have a subcommittee work on possible wording to bring back to the 21st?
That has led to a lot of problems in the past, and I would say probably let's not do that.
I'm just asking.
So,
what do you
if
I'm
think?
hearing
there's-
Noah's like,
It's just at this point we're trying to get to the finish line of adoption of the general plan. So how I'm imagining this could shake out would be some type of a policy that says, I'd create a definition of wineries, and it could be broken up by individual zoning districts or citywide, and the policy could be either one, and we're going to bring back questions and some thoughts on that, and then that definition gets applied to each individual zoning district when we update the zoning code.
But it would not go into the general plan. You don't
no, the
see.
policy would go in the general plan.
Oh, is that what you're saying?
That is what I'm saying,
Okay.
and it gets back to
I
the
see.
distinction between how staff sees the intent of the general plan.
Right, and then we'd make the changes in the zoning to be consistent with.
And that's just one option. The other option would be to create a definition in the general plan, but understanding that it is a challenge to write a definition that then could be applied to each zoning district if the direction is not to prohibit them in specific districts.
But I heard you say that a definition would be written for each zoning.
That's one policy that could be recommended from the commission to the council to be included in the general plan.
So and we might do that at the next meeting. Is that what you're saying?
Mhm.
Okay, thanks.
So come prepared with ideas.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Anything else? All right, let's open up the tourism comments. All right. Who would like to speak on the tourism petition? I'm going to open up the public comment. Okay, so you all came just to not talk about the tourism petition?
Hello, how are you doing? Erin Prispolinski, 1184 Hudson. Kind of coming new to this, so thank you all for your work. Try to keep somewhat abreast of the goings on from various news sources and friends and what have you. So I just want to register, someone who lives here. I actually do have kids at the one child at the high school who rides his bike, one of the few I feel really safe with. I think the biggest threat there would definitely be the student drivers, not the commercial industry, just for the record. But I just wanted to say, we live in a tourist area, and one of the reasons why we're able to have this beautiful area is because the grapes drive profit in this area. So I just want to register that we can grow smartly and strategically, and I think thanks to people in the seats and intelligent people in the community, that can be done well. And I don't want it to be this scary thing where we hear the word tourism, it becomes this evil word. We welcome tourists. Most people I know enjoy having tourists, and people come, they leave, it's a happy place. And I just feel like we're becoming a city that's, when you start reading The Star and other news sources, we're kind of anti-tourist, we're anti-business, we're not welcoming people who come here. People leaving because of a roller coaster being built is much less of a concern of mine than people leaving because they don't have jobs here. Tourism is what brings jobs. The people who live and work in this community are able to do so because of the tourist industry. So I trust that we can do this smartly and strategically, and that keeping the general plan general allows us to then have the meetings. As far as I understand, we still have to then get permits. So I don't really think a roller coaster would then go through a crack like that because there are other things in place. So I think you are right with your idea that the general plan is a general thing, and then we're human beings who are intelligent, and then we talk and we have other things in place to say, okay, now we see your architectural plan, and we review it or we don't, we approve it, we go back. That's what happens when you build the house, and I trust that's what happens when you do something commercially. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners and staff. The Chamber of Commerce I'm speaking on behalf of the Chamber this evening. The Chamber of Commerce, we are not in favor of repeating ourselves. Instead, we make carefully considered, well-vetted statements on behalf of our 500-plus membership base. However, given that the Citizens' Voice's proposed language and the changes to the general plan that are being proposed is a discussion on tonight's agenda, we feel it is prudent to reiterate our strong position on some of the issues raised by the proposed language. The St. Helena Chamber of Commerce would like to read into the record the language of a petition which we circulated less than 48 hours ago in response to learning of the Citizens' Voice request to insert proposed language into the general plan. As to, let me just read it for you. We, the undersigned, support managed tourism as the economic engine that drives St. Helena. Our jobs, businesses, and livelihoods depend on agriculture, hospitality, wine, and restaurants. We know that when business thrives, St. Helena can have the infrastructure, the services, and the strong community that we all want. Incorporating outdated language back into the updated general plan is futile. New answers to traffic, housing, and infrastructure need to be pursued. We cannot limit ourselves by saying no to tourism. With the city's current financial situation, we cannot re-adopt policies that limit our economic potential. We believe that there can be a balance between tourism and our quality of life, and we endorse strategic, forward-thinking economic development programs instead of repeating failed policies. We have the data. Our quality of life is affected negatively by failed restrictions placed on tourism. St. Helena has severe financial issues due to lack of funding. St. Helena could flourish if we embrace tourism effectively. The facts are, tourists pay transient occupancy tax. This is a hotel tax paid by those who stay in hotels. Residents do not pay TOT. In St. Helena's general fund, TOT is the least revenue generating source of income for St. Helena, bringing in only approximately 10% of our general fund. Property tax is approximately 35%, and sales tax is approximately 25%. Transient occupancy tax revenues remain 100% in the city. St. Helena is not fully taking advantage of this opportunity. The city also has in place restrictions on tourism with limits on wine sales.
If you could wrap it up, it is a pretty long letter.
It is, and thank you.
And we each have a copy of
understand.
it, yeah.
I wanted to point out that the petition that we circulated less than 48 hours ago has already received well over 200 responses, and it did generate some interesting insights, and I would encourage all of you to read it. I think it absolutely reflects a very strong portion of what of our community and what they are thinking with regards to tourism and strengthening our economy. So I would ask you to please consider that.
I have definitely been checking it out. So,
Any questions?
Any questions?
The rest of the language of the poll is online if anyone cares to finish reading it.
Perfect. Thank you. Anyone else?
Commissioners, staff members, good evening. Oliver Caldwell, Crane Avenue. The folks from Citizens Voice are friends of mine, and I understand what their objective is. And we both believe in the quality of life, and we just maybe disagree how we get there. So this is not being adversarial to what your position is. I don't want them beating me up in the hallway when we're done. So, but it's just that I'm a merchant. I own a building on Main Street. I'm also a parent with 2 kids in the high school. I'm a citizen here. I'm a senior citizen. And so I have many different hats. And so when I looked at the general plan, as it stands, I hope it didn't change again since yesterday. After downloading it, reading it 10 times over, I thought it was pretty comprehensive because what it does, it strikes the balance, I think, where we're trying to get to, which is it ensures diversity. And it says if there's going to be any kind of tourist serving or visitor serving elements, it has to be upscale, no mass market. Well, those are 2 big restrictions in themselves that could handle pretty much, a lot of the applicants coming into this town, and to ensure the kind of the quality that we're looking for. And so to add further language to it in Citizens Voice is so restrictive that it requires some sort of standardized quantitative metrics to implement it. When you say something like prohibit any visitor serving activity which would compromise the quality of life, how do you measure that? How's that done? So you can't put something in the law which you can't implement or measure or test. Otherwise it becomes subjective. So we'll always be here at every hearing trying to decide one more jewelry store, one more gallery, and then I know Bobby going to go, well, I need some metrics. What's the cap? And there's no cap, so it goes around and around. So, but I think with the diversity argument, it kind of explains itself. The second thing is, in their language, compromise the quality of St. Helena by significantly increasing the total number of tourists. Well, how do you measure the total number of tourists? Is there going to be somebody on Main Street with a little clicker? And how many is too many tourists? Let me just say this about the fundamentals of retail on Main Street. There is no business on Main Street that could survive local serving. None. In fact, they did a kind of a survey of the chamber asking, what's your percentage? And they said about 50-50. Okay, so can you imagine any business with half their businesses gone on Main Street? So in order for Citizens Voice to really be effective, you would almost have to put a restriction on ever buying from the internet because you'd want to bolster up the local serving stores, right? Which means that it would be legal to buy on the internet or buy from anywhere outside of the zip code to really make that effective, which is absurd, totally. It'd also be absurd, too, if you told the businesses down in St. Helena that you couldn't sell to tourists. So all these arguments are going around and around, and I think what it is, the more restrictions you put on a code, the more difficult it is for business to survive, because the fundamental aspect about retail is it's a reactive business. It reacts to the times, the demographics, and the markets. It doesn't create these things. It only reacts. So you can't go back to the past if the market demands and the demographics have changed. You just can't go there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Dave Finney. I live on Allen Avenue, and didn't prepare anything, and I wasn't expecting to speak tonight, and my wife told me I shouldn't tell this story, but about 3 months ago, I had to meet some people in Yountville at about 7 a.m. on a Sunday morning, and I don't hang out in Yountville a lot. I avoid it, basically, but when I was there at 7 a.m. and nobody was on the streets are perfect, the sidewalks are perfect, the landscaping's perfect, it's a manicured town, and our sidewalks are not close to, nothing in our infrastructure is, half of perfect. And so I want to echo what Aaron said, is that I don't want to be Yountville, but I don't want to be Vallejo. So there's something in between, and this growth, it's not just going to explode. And I have a business on Main Street too, so I understand it's not easy, and almost all of our revenue is from tourists. It's a tasting room. And And also, we are in the Napa Valley. And another story is I was telling our winemaker in France about how hard it is to plant vineyards in the valley right now, and it's probably going to cost X amount of dollars and 4 or 5 years for us to get our permits. And he was looking at me and he said, "But you're in Napa. Isn't that where they grow the grapes?" And it's kind of that concept. It's like we're in Napa, we're in St. Helena, and we're trying to regulate or stop tourism that's related to the very industry that it got us here is just counterintuitive. And when you tell someone from outside, it was almost disbelief. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Kevin Diamond of 1328 Magnolia here in St. Helena, representing the Chamber of Commerce and also a business representative in the city that
Could you speak a little bit louder into the microphone, please?
sorry about that.
You'll tell.
And also a business that I believe depends on tourism to a degree. I think there's a couple important points to make. Number one, the general plan should not be something that legislates our morality or our economic development. There's other ways to make sure that that general plan is carried through, and that's probably primarily through zoning ordinances. The Chamber opposes caps on business. Again, it's tough to legislate morality, and it's also tough to legislate business growth. Although we're not advocating a Wild West free market enterprise is going to rule, we think that business should be allowed to thrive based on what the customers are demanding. The Chamber supports the recommended hiring of an economic development professional. Many cities that are suffering from poor economic development are wise enough to make sure that committees and wordsmithing groups aren't allowed to drive economic development, but they make a point to make sure that there's an economic development professional. And especially in an economy that is thriving such as ours, I think there's a responsibility that behooves us to make sure that we're managing it correctly. When I hear my friends that own businesses on Main Street, or also known as Highway 29, I really feel for them because they're caught in this demand from the city to have local serving businesses, yet their very profit lines depend on the tourism model that drives a big part of their economy. And I think that, we can't have rapid paradigm shifts that are going to hinder them from being successful. It's a very short slope when you wordsmith that you can't have tourists or events in your winery. Well, how short of a distance is it to not having events or tourists come to an art gallery? Or how short is it that you can't have events held at a jewelry store? So it's a very short, slippery slope that we have to make sure that we don't have paradigm shifts that are radical as it reflects retail. The city of St. Helena does live on Highway 29. There's no doubt about that. Can you imagine tourists that aren't allowed to stop or visit an event on 29 because we wordsmith it so that that's what becomes the norm? With that, thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Oh.
Hey guys, Doug Barr, 2480 Spring Mountain Road. Well, I was hoping to dodge the bullet tonight and not have to be up here, but it looks like I have to respond. And it looks like also the Chamber of Commerce knew about this before we did, or we would have had a few more bodies here. I got this on an email this morning. It was the first thing I found on my email. This is what made me laugh because I can't tell you how many times I've read in the Star guest commentaries from the Chamber saying, "Kumbaya, we ought to all talk together. We ought to get together and work together. We shouldn't be divisive." And yet I got a petition against my petition and never a call from the Chamber of Commerce to say to me, "Why don't we sit down and have a cup of coffee? I see you. We've been doing this for months now. We've been here 2 or 3 times. I've talked to everybody here. I've talked to everybody on the council. I've talked to Noah. I've talked to everybody I could find in this town about this. The word's been out for months. Never a call for a cup of coffee and a discussion about how we might work together on this. So it made me laugh until I actually read their petition, and then I found myself utterly disappointed, because if you're going to have a petition against a petition, you ought to give us some new ideas that are similar to the ideas that we're presenting, or at least in opposition to the ideas that we're presenting. But instead, it's a screed that I've seen repeated over and over and over by the Chamber in guest commentaries and letters on their website saying tourism, more tourism, more tourism, more tourism, more tourism, without a single mention of the cost of tourism to the community, either in how the community sees tourism and how it's perceived from the outside, and what it does, most importantly, to the brand of this community. St. Helena has a brand. The brand in this community is a small rural town, authenticity. We have businesses on Main Street that are owned by Oliver. His kids go to the school here. They're owned by Dave. His kids go to the school here. He's got them here with him tonight. The authenticity in this town is that every store on Main Street is owned by somebody local. So clearly whoever wrote this didn't spend 1 minute looking at our proposals.
Mr. Barr, to us.
Oh, sorry. But our proposals, in fact, included efforts to keep Main Street businesses in the hands of locals, giving preference to local serving, people who live here. We've changed the definition of local serving. We don't care if it's 50% or 50% or 70% or 30%. That's not the point of local serving. The point of local serving is the people who own the stores in this town participate in the community. That's the redefinition. The effort to limit retail chains is to limit those kinds of stores that we've seen defile Aspen and East Hampton by bringing in international chains that come in, we've talked about this already, and hollow out the Main Street, because the stores that have those kinds of businesses that are their home bases are in Bal Harbor, and they're in Aspen, and they're in New York, and they're in Beverly Hills, and they want to put St. Helena on the letterhead, but they don't really care about spending any money here. They don't care about customers here. They're not locally owned. They're not locally manned. The money doesn't stay here, and the rents skyrocket and drive out all the little businesses, and then we look like all of those other 1%er towns. Can I go on for one more minute? We also talk about 2 other things. One is caps on hotels. We're not saying we have no hotels. We're saying that the city council ought to put a cap on it so that they can control it, and that we ought to have a better definition of what a hotel looks like, because you can't invite developers to St. Helena and say, anybody come on down, we'll tell you with a use permit whether we like you or not. We're going to face a hodgepodge of different kinds of things depending on who's on the planning commission or the city council during that period, and we're going to end up with lawsuits because it seems to be capricious. It seems to be arbitrary when you say you can do it but you can't do it, you can do it but you can't do it. So we need to better define that. We've been working with Victor, we've been working with all of you, we've talked to you, we've talked to members of the committee that wrote the original plan back in 2010, and it seems like it's 1910, doesn't it, since you got started on this thing. And we're trying to put together some language that's going to protect the businesses in town, that's going to protect the hotels here and the tourism, and manage tourism better in this town, and have a cost-benefit analysis so we can do that better. Astonishingly to me, this assumed that we were anti-business, completely crazy, that we're anti-tourist, completely crazy. We're just trying to manage it. We're just trying to do it right, because we've seen other towns in just this situation, including Aspen, just sent out an RFP saying, how do we get rid of these kinds of businesses? Because we can't sustain our Main Street. We don't have rents. We have no more locally owned businesses. Came out in April. We're just trying to protect the town. We're not trying to stall business. We're not trying to be opposed to business. I think we could work with the Chamber of Commerce. If they just give me a call, I'm in the phone book. Anyway, thank you, guys.
Thank you. Anyone else? I'm going to close the public comment. If anyone found something above and beyond what we've already discussed, feel free to share it with Noah. If not, I'd like to move on to our next agenda item.
I think it'd be great to have a powwow with everybody.
All right.
With everybody involved, with the chamber, with all these groups, with everyone here. I mean, to look at each other and exchange.
All right, and with that, I feel that there was a consensus on the nothing above and beyond, so thank you to everyone who came for that agenda item. We're going to move on to our public hearings. This is a lot line adjustment, demolition permit, and design review for 1252 and 1242 Allen Avenue. May we have a staff report, please?
Thank you, Chair Parker. This request is from Joseph Farrell for, as you mentioned, lot line adjusted demolition permit and design review. And the project proposes to
No,
relocate.
I'm actually going to interrupt you. For those of you leaving, if you could keep your comments to a low volume in the hallway, we can't hear you.
The project proposes to relocate the existing northern property line between 1242 and 1252 Allen Avenue approximately 1 foot to the south, demolish the existing 900 square foot home at 1242 Allen, and request design review approval to construct a new approximately 3,100 square foot home at 1242 Allen, which is located in the medium density residential district. The project plans are going to be cycling through on the screens here as I present. As mentioned, the project site is actually 2 parcels, but the 1252 parcel is only involved because of a lot line adjustment, essentially moving the property line, as I mentioned, 1 foot. Both are approximately 1/4 acre, just slightly larger. The design of the individual home proposed is a 2,300 square foot on the living space on the ground floor and approximately a 730 square foot second floor. The rear yard's developed with some additional amenities, some on-site photographs of the existing home. The design review, as identified by staff, meets the development criteria identified in the medium density zoning district, including setback requirements, height restrictions, and lot coverage, as well as the floor area ratio. The site's designated medium density residential by the general plan, and this is defined as providing for single family detached, attached homes, secondary residential units, public quasi uses, and other compatible uses. It's a predominant residential designation occurring throughout large areas of the cities, as we've discussed. The property is located in the urban service area and is within the Adams Street Historic District. Some of the most applicable general plan policies are identified in the staff report, such as permitting infill development, encouraging a mix of housing types, providing a variety of lot widths and sizes, encouraging garages towards the rear, providing lot coverage that's consistent with the scale of historic areas, setbacks, massing configurations consistent with older parts of the community. And the policies require future residential development to conform to the historic patterns and preserve historic and cultural resources. As mentioned, staff finds that although the proposed garage is not located at the rear, the project is consistent with the general plan in that the provided density is within the range of allowable densities. It's continuing the single-family housing type currently on the site. It maintains a historic development pattern through the use of articulation in the architecture as well as setbacks, and incorporates historic building materials and minimizes the proposed second floor element of the structure. Similarly, the home is not located as a designated city resources in the historic designation. The property is zoned medium density residential, which implements the medium density designation of the general plan. Lot coverage is approximately 30% here. The max height is 25% proposed. And as I mentioned, the project meets the development criteria as analyzed by staff. Interestingly, the zoning code, as we've discussed in some more recent situations, lot line adjustments are actually approved by the director, and the decision is final unless appealed to the Planning Commission. And the code states that the director should provide a report of the lot line adjustment to the Planning Commission, allow the Planning Commission to choose whether or not they want to review it. If they do not choose to review it, then the director is directed to notice the approval of the lot line adjustment in the newspaper and by sending written notice. From staff's perspective, this is a duplicative process and is actually essentially more time. So staff combined the lot line adjustment into the overall project and the entire scope of the projects before the Planning Commission tonight. As mentioned, the property is located in a historic district, but the property was not found to be a contributor to the district. Although it is over 100 years old, it's been modified over the years, and a historic resource report found that demolition would not be a significant impact. The CEQA determination identified, based on some of the previous analysis, that the project qualifies for a Class 1 and Class 3 categorical exemption. Water neutrality was analyzed, and the project is identified as meeting that requirement. And staff found that the project does meet the required findings for design review and demolition. And based on all of that, while at the time of writing the report there were no comments on the project, a letter was received by staff, which was placed on the dais for you, and there's copies available in the back for the public. This letter identified it's a letter from a neighboring resident on Allen Avenue, identified some concerns with regards to the size of the home. They were requesting some lap siding be incorporated into it, potentially relocation of some of the second floor windows or even elimination of the second floor, requests larger setbacks and additional articulation in the front facade, and some additional landscaping. No other comments were received on the project from staff, and staff identified the only issue with the proposal is the lot line adjustment procedural steps that was previously identified, and so based on that, planning department is recommending that the planning commission determine the project be exempt from the requirements of CEQA and accept the required findings, approving the lot line adjustment, design review, and demolition as requested. Staff's available for any questions, and the applicant is here to give a presentation as well.
Any questions of staff at this time?
I have a couple. Was the lot line adjustment happen because of a surveying, because of recent surveying or something, or what was that about?
I didn't ask any justifications for the lot line adjustment. It's like I said, it's actually only moves the property line 1 foot as you get to the far end of the lot. It doesn't even really move on the front part of the home, and I didn't ask for any justification. I believe it's actually in favor of the neighboring property, so I imagine it was some type of a deal between the two property owners before it was sold.
And the other question is, it might be there, but I couldn't find how many bedrooms are in the current house, the original house. It's not mentioned.
Let me review the information.
Okay, thanks.
Perfect. Can we wait for that answer and I can open up the public hearing? I'd like to open up the public hearing and invite the applicant to come forward.
Hello, Commission. My name is Joe Farrell. I'm the architect. I don't know how specifically you want me to go through the actual design drawings. I'm sure you all have seen them. I can if you wish me to. If not, I could just speak in generalities about the plan.
I think general is fine if we have any specific questions.
Okay. To answer a couple questions, the lot line adjustment was done as a deal between the property owners. There was a fence built years and years ago that was erroneously built it wasn't built on the property line, and in order to just kind of, since the yards have both been respecting that for years and years, they decided to legitimize it and do a lot line adjustment. And then I believe it was a 2-bedroom home on the existing the cottage that's there. Yeah. So generally speaking, the house there was really old, in very dilapidated shape, and not really worth rehabilitating. I think if we tried to move that, it would probably fall down. So the plan was to provide a new home. The property is slightly sloping down to the back. I went through several iterations of single-story homes, and what I'm finding is when you do single-story homes in that 3,000 range on a property like this, you end up covering quite a bit of the property with the footprint of the building, and there's less and less landscaped area for outdoor use, as well as what we'll get into talking about stormwater. The garage was placed in the front was basically to try to compact the building. There's new stormwater regulations that require that we kind of, the goal is to reduce impervious surfaces on the property so we can allow more stormwater to seep into the soil. That's a big reason why we went to a 2-story home. The home, we didn't want to make it 2-story everywhere, but we wanted to compact that footprint as much as possible to relieve the backyard, to have natural turf and landscaping planting areas for water retention. And that's also another reason why we wanted to keep the garage up front, was to minimize the amount of driveway. And I know we could have done gravel, but you still have to compact the subsoil below a driveway, which kind of can reduce some absorption. The floor plan is really it's a 4-bedroom home with a master bedroom down, a guest bedroom, and then 2 like kids' bedrooms upstairs, and then kind of a general open living area with a kitchen dining area and access to the rear yard with a deck. And then we also have a pool. And then around the pool area, if we could go back to the site plan, we were providing a bioswale around that entire rear patio deck or lawn area that's where we're going to bring storm water and let it seep around that perimeter of that area and seep into the soil. The massing and articulation of the front facade, I try to step the building back both in plan and verticality of it, and to create a nice articulation street facade that features a nice dormer, and those are inspiration photos there of kind of colors and materials. I think we did the sides while they're flat. We're trying to keep the building kind of compact to reserve the rear yard for, once again, outdoor use and water retention. We did do some outreach to the neighbors and met with several of them. And I did speak with the woman who wrote the letter in, and we are open to kind of considering speaking with my client about exterior materials. Although we have incorporated horizontal siding on the project. It's more of a feature. The majority of the exterior siding is board and batten, but we also wanted some articulation of facade with incorporating some horizontal siding. So there are quite a few walls that do have the horizontal siding. Most of the neighbors we met with, we got good responses from. In fact, the neighbor to the left, where the lot line adjustment is, that's where the 2-story portion of the building is. And I'm not sure if Noah's mentioned, we did a shadow study for her. She was concerned about the second story's impact and shadows cast upon her yard to the northwest and her pool area. So we had a consultant do a shadow study that provided what the shadows are going to be cast from the second story onto her property during the winter, spring, fall, and then summer times at 3 times a day. And she was satisfied. She wrote a letter. Is the letter in there? I'm not sure if it is. There was an email she sent that she actually endorsed the project. So we have other consultants here. We have the landscape architect here. We have a civil engineer here. If you have questions about landscape, about drainage, we also have the builder here, Tom Trainer. So that's it. Unless you have any more questions of me, I'll take a seat.
Any questions? No? Perfect. Thank you very much.
I'm wondering, did you find out, is it 2 bedrooms, or is there a way to find out for sure? Because it sounded like that wasn't certain.
I don't have that information in the packet.
Okay, but it's important with respect to the water analysis. So I would really like.
It probably is in the water report. Let me look.
Yeah, it is. So
the water report.
It is in the water report, and it shows as 4 occupants existing baseline, which is 2 bedrooms.
Then my other question is still with regard to the water analysis. The state thinks of maximum occupancy. It is 2 people per bedroom plus 1, and that is not how this water analysis is done. Is that typical that the water people don't use those same standards? So it should be 5 and 9 that we're looking at.
I'm not familiar with the regulations you're referring to. However, all the water analysis we've done and the guidelines we use in Napa County is based on actually gallons per day per bedroom. And the assumption is it's 2 people per bedroom. But it's 150 gallons per day per bedroom. That's the baseline usage. They did some different calculations in here for existing usage, but that's the baseline we use.
I see, but when they do the number of showers and that sort of thing, it's based
it's all
on 2
specified in our, it's 2 people per bedroom, and it's specified in the water neutral policy that the city adopted, that it's 2 people per bedroom.
So those standards are codified.
Okay.
The public comment's still open. We'd like to invite the builder or the landscape? Would anyone like to speak with them? Or do you want me to close the public hearing? All right. I'm going to close the public hearing and invite commission discussion.
I have a little difficulty with that garage sticking out in front. I don't care if it's in the front, but I don't think it should be out in front of the rest of the house. It doesn't appear to me to be in the same plane that houses on the rest of the neighborhood. They all seem to be going straight across, and I don't know why that can't be stepped back to be even with, what's the room on the other side?
The guest room.
Yeah, the guest room, yeah. That's the only comment I have. Other than that, I have no problem with the project.
I have sort of a related comment. We've seen this kind of housing design before, California farmhouse or whatever you call it, and we see it a lot on large lots. And to me, one of the defining features of it is it sort of has this H-shaped floor plan, and it has this massive great room
in the center
that you see through from front to back. And in this particular location, and I think the floor plan is great, but in this location, I would like to see the house closer to the street. I feel that the character of the neighborhood here is homes and porches that are all right up at that 20-foot setback line. And as more houses are sold on this street and redeveloped, I think we're moving away from sort of the historic, close-in character that characterizes Allen Avenue and some of the other surrounding streets. So I agree with Commissioner Kistner that the garage sticking out front is a problem, but I wouldn't push it back
So you just have the
and push the whole house. I think it's 35, close to 40 feet off the front sidewalk. And I don't know how that can be done, frankly, without reworking the floor plan a little. But I could see a gradual change in the character, particularly this block between Spring and Tainter, where we have a couple, apparently another demolition going to happen across the street. And I see a gradual erosion of sort of the close-in community character of the Adams district. And I would note that one of our standards is to look at setbacks, building massing, to be consistent with older parts of town. And personally, I find the front setback here inconsistent, and I wouldn't want to put something in motion, change the character of the neighborhood.
Well, that's interesting. I was thinking that I should have asked, I suppose. I was wondering if there were any way to bring the height down, simply because it's a concern of several neighbors, and then because that has to do with the massing you're talking about, and the setbacks on the side. If they could be, I know it's making a smaller house, but that would also be more in keeping, I think, with that neighborhood if there were more space on the side. And, I'm okay with what you're saying about the porches being closer to the sidewalk. I hadn't thought of that. It doesn't bother me. But the side, the massing, especially if it's going to stay two-story, it's so close to the other properties, and I'm not sure who the people, there aren't any people here who were speaking against it. But I do want to respect that particular comment in the letter that was sent. And so I would like to see the side setbacks actually bigger. And if the height could be taken down some, that would be great. I have a feeling it can't be, but I think that would diminish this massing as well, because it is pretty, it's just covering a lot of the lot. And it's high and close to the sides, so I don't know if you guys agree.
Well, I like Commissioner Koberstein's suggestion of shifting the more of an H style to have that porch. It will definitely balance off your concern with the garage being really just kind of sticking. Literally, it's thumb out.
So you'd bring it up.
So you bring up the guest room.
That would be the same. It would leave the same effect that I was looking for.
Yeah, it would address your concern and also yours as well with the neighborhoods being more close to the street. I just would the applicant. We have to ask if that's something that he would be open to coming back to us with that.
Well, I'm hearing several things here. The height issue. One thing I would like to say is we did really closely show this to the neighbor who's the person who wrote the letter about the height is not the person who's on the side of the height. It's single story on that side of the height. The person that we did the shadow study for is very comfortable with the building height.
And that's to be commended. Thank you. We do appreciate you reaching out to neighbors and doing the shadow study. That was very...
Yeah. So it wasn't like we just did it. You know, we definitely tried to mitigate the issue.
But how do you feel about possibly shifting that guest room? I know that looking at the blueprint, it would be difficult with the door to the master bedroom and how everything's spaced, but it would lend itself to how Allen Street already is, and then also deal with the garage issue.
I think we could potentially shift the guest bedroom forward, if that, and maybe the whole master suite slide along with it, so it balances the front out a little bit more. We were basically trying to reserve a little more space in the front yard for landscaping. So if you see that planter and there's trellis work and there's a meandering path, you get a sense that there's a outdoor space there. So that does add character to it. And I think if you go to the no, is there any way to put in the cover sheet with the 3D? Yeah. There, I mean, unfortunately, it's not a perspective drawing. That's more of a 2D image. But that, you see the trellis work there. You see a planter. There's a definitely sense of a space there that is has character to it, and it's negative space, and I think there's positive space and negative space. So I think you're maybe discounting that somewhat, and it widens the street feel a little bit to allow people to enjoy their front yard and not be right in the street and sidewalk. And so there is that character, and while it does that, it still reserves quite a bit of rear yard. But we're not opposed to moving it forward to do that. I just want to make sure you're aware there is space there. But we could study moving that I think if that solves the issue, I'm sure we could move it forward. And
it would solve it for me, I think.
Even with the garage still forward in the front.
Did you design the house across the street, the new house?
1217, yes, I did.
Right. I mean, when I look at that house, I see the mass of the house. The garage is not protruding forward, and you have your open porch, kind of connecting those two wings.
Yeah, it's kind of bookend.
Right.
Yeah.
I appreciate what you're saying about the negative space, but I think we're sort of losing that front porch feeling that maybe some of the historic district has. And with the farmhouse style, the black and the white, to me, it just accentuates the garage. When you look at that, that's the first thing I see on the facade. And
it's unbalanced. Is that the way you feel?
And unfortunately, it reminds me of like the cookie cutter houses that the tract homes,
right.
and
okay.
I don't think that you were really going for that. Yeah, sorry, your garage reminds me of a tract home.
I think it looks fine the way that part of it.
But I think it would.
I mean, we have landscaping up against that wall. It may not show up in that image there, but we would scale that wall down. But yeah, definitely, I feel like we could pull if we pull the guest portion forward, I think that gives us room to maybe carry
It's less stark.
Yeah. And it creates more of the courtyard entry. We could definitely study that.
All right. Okay, well, let's see if we have a motion.
But you can't do anything about the sides? Probably not.
The side, these are small lots. We're really trying to maintain backyard for usable backyard. The more you squeeze it, the more it goes into the backyard.
Unless you just cut down the sides.
Yeah, and we feel like this house meets the design guidelines. I mean, the development standards were under the floor area. We're well under the coverage, and mostly because we decided to keep it two-story. And coverage is important. I mean, that's landscape, that's water retention. I really think the more the state gets concerned with stormwater, it really wants us to start doing two-story homes.
I hear you.
To keep more ground surface.
I would still like to see it, I mean, no one else is concerned, but that would be just my personal thing, is to see more space on the side to accommodate the neighbors who were feeling was too massive. But I appreciate
I'd have
what
to
you
say
said about
it does. The one neighbor that felt that way is we have respected with the
I
single
hear you.
story.
Of course, she might not live there the whole time, but
she doesn't.
I appreciate what you said about that.
Yeah. And we have we went to the neighbors that were across the street. One of them being that vacant home, but the person directly across the street loves it. He goes, I love it. He really enjoys the house.
Great.
And so.
Thank you.
But you would bring it back.
Yes, he said yes. He would. All right.
Yeah, I mean, if it's clear that we can't get an approval of the current design tonight,
yeah, I would.
I mean, if we were to put it to vote and you were going to vote no because of this issue, of course we're going to.
All right. So let's have a motion.
I would move that we allow the applicant to bring it back with the conditions that the guest bedroom and the porch move forward.
What about the demolition? Do we do that? Is that a separate motion?
No, we're just continuing it.
Oh, it's on.
Is there any way you could consider maybe approving the lot line adjustment to keep things moving, or do you have to do it all
we want to
together?
separate it out?
That's fine with me.
I can find all elements of the project.
Okay.
He's already approved that.
Right.
He's approved that.
You feel comfortable with that because
Yes, I do feel
we don't want that to be
Yeah,
all of a sudden make a bunch of design changes and go, oh no, we don't.
Move
like
it
that.
6 tenths of an inch and everybody will be happy, right?
All right. Do we have a second?
Second.
Vice Chair Kistner,
Yes.
Commissioner Monette,
Yes.
Commissioner Koberstein,
Yes.
Chairperson Parker.
Yes. And thank you so much. We do hate continuing things, but
Yeah, if
it's kind of easy when it's just one thing and it's not an open-ended item.
right.
Perfect.
No,
All right.
No, what would
Thank
be? Can I just ask him one more question? What is the deadline to get it back to be on the next planning commission meeting?
We're essentially finalizing the agenda for the next meeting tomorrow.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
If you get it to me relatively quickly, I can commit to the first meeting in July, which I think is
The 5th.
Thank you. It is the 5th, and that's a discussion item. I just want to make sure, and this can lead right into it, that
Yeah, well,
no
we're
one's going to be here or be gone, so people will be available for that meeting.
So we're not going to have a meeting on this.
No, I'm wanting to make sure commissioners will be
I will be
available.
here. Is there, Mary, will you be here for
I'll be here.
4th of July weekend, 5th of July?
It's a Tuesday.
Oh, yeah, that is a good, yeah, if I'm on the commission. Don't laugh, Zinnia. Commissioner Monette, you'll be present? Okay, perfect. All right. Okay, moving on then to, department reports. That's kind of teed into that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And I did not provide the agenda forecast. I apologize for that. I wasn't able to update it. However, there is an administrative determination that staff made regarding allowing Friesen Wines to occupy 1234 Main Street in addition to Thornhill Winery under the existing definition of tasting room. Thornhill is approved for a use permit by the actually City Council in 2014. They're having some issues. They actually lost a lot of their wine in the earthquake, and so they are having issues with having enough inventory to supply the demand for their customers. And so they approached staff regarding what the process would be for Friesen Wines to occupy their space jointly with them. Staff reviewed the definition of tasting rooms and the conditional use permit that was approved for the use and made the determination that they did meet the definition of tasting room, and subject to the conditional use permit could occupy that space with them as a secondary winery. They're subject to all of the requirements of the use permit, but staff did approve that. It was noticed for the 14-day appeal period. No comments have been received, but in keeping with the commitment staff made to provide updates to the commission, that's the purpose of this.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else?
We will be bringing back the general plan for the 21st.
Are you sure?
100%. And as mentioned, that will be the comment period or the public hearing to take comments on the general plan, EIR. We will also hold a separate public hearing at the end of the 45-day comment period for commission review and action on both of those documents. And it's not an approval the commission's been making. It will be a recommendation to the City Council on both of those documents. And finally, I will say it's been identified by staff that the the version of the general plan EIR that was posted was truncated when they scanned it by the scanning the printer, and so we will be restarting that 45-day public review period as of tomorrow.
Okay.
So what that does is essentially providing an extra, I think it's 12 days of public review and comment. It makes no difference in the review and comment period, and any comments received today obviously will be incorporated, and people will still have essentially more time to comment and review the document. It was a mistake that was noticed basically when they scanned the document. It wasn't complete, and it's 400 pages, so staff didn't catch that until recently. So it was resent to the state. That period is starting again tomorrow. We do not feel that that should influence the decision to hold the public hearing on the 21st, given that it doesn't essentially change the amount of time that people have had to review or comment on the document.
Will we get new copies of that then?
You will get new copies that will be included in your box. It's the traffic section you'll notice is the section that was truncated. You will be provided new copies. The commission will, or the council will be provided new copies. New copies will be posted onto the website and available for public review.
So what's the final date of the new 45 days?
It's 45 days from tomorrow. I have that information on my desk now.
Do you want, like, I have my copy, do you want my copy to save paper and just replace what?
I started to look into that. We already ordered the prints just because of the
Okay.
there's we've got new ones.
All right.
I mean, that whole thing?
All right. Anything, we did agenda forecast. Is there anything that anyone would like to put on our agenda? I think we have plenty. Yeah. All right. And with that,
Eventually, I want to put something about the fireplace thing, but ordinance, but.
okay, we'll just email Noah and he can just
All right, you
throw
can
it
put
on the
your
thing and we
website.
can
You
discuss
know what
it.
I'm talking
Yeah.
about.
I think it's already on there.
It's on there.
What? No, I understand that, but you know what I'm talking about, the upon sale of a home, substandard, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right. Still with that, I'm going to adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much.